All right. So in addition to financial conflicts of interest, I also manage our export control program. So UNM and, okay, so here we go. Science and research thrive off of the creation and open dissemination of knowledge, right? That's like our mission, is to develop and openly disseminate, new research. However, at the same time, we have to protect certain controlled and obviously classified information from being acquired by our adversaries or really anyone who wants to steal research from us, right? So the purpose of the UNM Export Control Program is to create a security program that balances those two competing demands, okay? So we want to obviously make sure that we're fostering research, but then also identifying the specific types of research that warrant control and developing security plans in order to control those items. So our goal is to always say yes. So we want to work with our investigators to identify the type of research that they're conducting, to identify the risks associated with their type of research and where they fall under in the regulations, and then create a plan so that we can foster the research in a safe space. So why do we care? So violations can be pretty severe. Fines up to $2 million or 20 years in prison for U.S. For each violation. UNM can also have administrative penalties. We can be debarred from receiving federal funding, which would include financial aid. So that would kill us, right? So we really need to ensure that we're on top of this. So we don't want our researchers going to prison, and it has happened, and I'll show you an example in a little bit of a researcher who, he actually was just released, but he served some pretty hard time for export violations. Okay, so the intersections of research. So fundamental research is research that is without control. So you're allowed to collaborate with anyone, validate theories, peer review, quality check, early access to innovation. So you're allowed to publish. You're allowed to hire foreign nationals to work on the project. Classified export controlled research means that there's usually a need to know. It has some sort of military application. It's highly sensitive. We need quality controls. There's publication restrictions as well as foreign national restrictions as indicated by the contract. Okay, so my job is to go through contracts that have red flag indicators, which I will go through in a second, and then determine whether the terms and conditions of the contract erode our ability to conduct the research under the fundamental research exclusion. And then usually we try to negotiate those terms and conditions out of the contract because we want to stay in the fundamental area. But we're not going to walk away from a contract. Let's say Army or Air Force wants that, only U.S. people to work on this project. We will develop a technology control plan in order to safeguard those protocols, train people, lock doors, whatever we need to do to ensure that we keep the research from unauthorized access. All right. So we don't expect our investigators, staff, or students to be an expert in export control. It's very gray area. There's so many different variables that determine whether something is controlled or not. But we want you to be able to identify certain red flag areas and then know who to contact, which would be me, to seek guidance, okay? And we take on the risk by gathering all of this information from you. So people are like, why are you asking me all these questions? Well, I'm trying to help you so that I can make sure that all of the variables are identified and we can determine the appropriate process to ensure compliance. So what are export control red flags? These are things that you should look for. I highly recommend that my investigators read the terms and conditions of their contracts. Oftentimes they don't, and it's good practice to know what you're entering into when you accept those funds from a federal sponsor. So publication restrictions from the sponsor, this is a big deal because if you have graduate students who are working on your project and you have a publication restriction, they can't use any of that work for their dissertation, right? So what we want to do is identify it early and get it out if we can, or you'll have to sign an acceptance of publication restriction and make sure that you communicate with that student, telling them that they cannot publish any work that happens based off of that protocol. For national restrictions, a lot of times investigators will groom an individual for a project, and then when the contract gets cut, it has a foreign national restriction. And then we have to find a US person to fill that position, right? So knowing ahead of time what you're entering into is a really good practice so that you're not scrambling at the end to find someone who's gonna have to find a US person. International travel. So I talked about the fundamental research exclusion. The fundamental research exclusion only applies to research that happens here in country. So the minute that you travel outside, your project becomes subject to export control laws and you're in a different ballgame. So that's why we care about whether you're traveling internationally. So if you're going to a conference or whatever, we want to identify it, and then our office offers some services to you in order to safeguard your research and even your personal information when you're traveling abroad. Foreign collaborators. So emails are physical exports. Oral transmission of technical data, that's an export. So if you are talking with your foreign collaborator, that would be considered an export violation if you're talking about controlled research. So that's why we need to know if you're collaborating with foreign nationals. So if the sponsor specifically states this is export controlled, or the research will have a military end use, or if the results of the research will have a dual use, meaning it has both a civilian application and also a military application. So like a weird example would be your car clicker, right? So you can open your car, which we probably do every day, but you can also set off a bomb, right? So your car clicker is actually a controlled technology to certain countries. And also your Apple iPad. So the iPad is controlled under the ECCN 5A992.C. And the reasons for control are anti-terrorism. And why? Because you can, shoot a missile with it, right? So to certain countries, based off of the end user, end use, and all of these other variables, taking an iPad is controlled. Okay, so we just have to identify where you're going, what you're doing, and then provide you with the tools to make sure that you're staying safe. All right, this is the university example. So Professor Reese Roth was a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He served 4 years in prison and had to pay a lot of money because he did two things. The first thing he did was he physically exported military technical data that had to do with surveillance technology that goes on the wings of drones to China. I know, why would you do that? And then he also hired 2 foreign nationals to work on a controlled project. So the project was obviously controlled, funded by the Air Force. It was a flow down contract, so Air Force prime award to a subcontract, to a outside contractor, and then they subbed out to the university. We have a lot of that happening all the time. That's a common trend, actually. And it was it wasn't a lot of money. It was like $4,000. And he hired 2 foreign nationals to work on the project. So he got caught and got sent to prison. He recently, within the past 2 months, was released. So, we need to really be aware of export controls. There's a lot of people who are, staunch, academic freedom. I should be able to teach whoever I want, whatever I want. And yes, for the most part, you should be able to. However, there are certain situations where it deals with military technology that we have to, you just can't do that. And it's the law. And it's not me, like my personal opinion, or even, it's the government's opinion. It's the law, and we have to ensure compliance. Do you have any questions before Deb Kudis goes on to industrial security? right, thank you guys so much. If you have any questions with regard to FCOI or export control, I left some cards up here, so you can grab a card and contact me. If you want more specialized training, if you want to go through the type of research that you do and identify specific risks involved with your research and how we can mitigate risks, I'd be happy to sit down with you and provide some one-on-one training. So with that said, I will let Deb Kudis talk about industrial security.
What do you press?
Just this.
Oh, that one.